Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Lou Moreno. Lou is the co-founder of In the Mix Studios and the founder of Midside Sound. He's an industry professional, mixing and mastering engineer. Lou has worked with Keisha Cole, Ari Lennox, Lucky Day, G-Eazy, and many, many more. He's also the co-host of the popular Mixing Music podcast alongside former Secret Sonics guest DK Waddell. I've been meaning to reach out to Lou for a while. I finally did, and then he finally booked a time, and here he is, graciously agreeing to do the show. Welcome to Secret Sonics, Lou.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
It's a total...
It's true. We've been meaning to do this. I missed our last meeting, and we're here now. We finally got this, and even then, I was racing back to the office to get this.
Yeah, well, life is crazy. I feel like everyone's lives have been a little bit crazy recently, because I feel like we're like in that post-pandemic rush. Like everyone wants to do stuff all the time now, and I think at some point we'll chill out again. But right now things are intense. I think a little bit for everybody.
I think an important thing that kind of is shown to us because of the pandemic is how much content is really consumed in a single day, if paid attention to, right? But how much content it takes to really get your name out there if there's a certain, outreach level you want to have. Right. We see YouTubers kind of going through this as well. Like during the pandemic, they were releasing every day. But now that everybody's got to get back to, I guess, some modicum of normalcy, it's really hard to keep daily content up, So like, I feel for the people that are like those daily content people, because I look at it and I aspire to want to be able to match that output. But I see the challenge of how much work goes into it.
It's insane. I don't think I could ever be a daily. I mean, basically my daily content is like my Instagram stories, and it's just kind of whatever is happening in the studio or I'm interested in, or if I see something that I think is funny, maybe I'll share it. And then, I do the podcast, and I'm like, to be honest, I'm kind of doing a bi-monthly thing for a little bit now because I have two kids and life is crazy, and I'm focused on trying to like figure out how to make a little bit more money.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just in a zone right now where it's like I just have to cut it back a little bit, not because I want to, but because I feel like I have to. And whatever. There's periods and seasons for everything, and I'm hoping the weekly grind will come back, because there's something to that. There's something about like the weekly thing. It's like part of your routine and rhythm, but it's not as insane as like daily. I don't know. I would never commit to a daily thing.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's funny because like it's something that like me and DK just recorded an episode on this, like with the episode revolving around the idea of like not necessarily exclusively self-control, but being in control of whatever you're doing, whether that be your spending habits, lowering your overhead, managing your time better, being able to say no because it doesn't fit the role that you're trying to fill, right? And part of that is kind of really important the older we get and the more mature we want to be seen in this industry as, like when we look at like some of these industry veterans, we see that they have a schedule, they have this, that, like they don't take clients past a certain time. And we assume that it's part of their success that they can do this, but it's also part of like, let's say that you're mixing for Cardi B. She can hire anybody she wants to work after 8 p.m. But there's also people she can't hire just because they morally will not work past that time. Not because she's not a good enough client, but because it no longer fits, I guess, their social requirements. For instance, Leslie Brathwaite is a great example of this, where he'll leave a session in the middle of, his work to go see his kid play baseball or something. He's going to go put his kid to sleep. And DK is a good example of this as well, because, I've called DK in the past where like something's happening in the studio and I just want his input before I make an executive decision on my own. But he's like, hey, I'm putting my kids to sleep right now. Is it important? And I'm like, you know what? Have your time with your kids. I'll take care of it. You know what I mean? Like, we're all trying to get to this point where we're not just acting more professional, but we can take ourselves more seriously in such a creative and chaotic industry. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, I'm just thinking about like the seasons, right? Like, kind of just mentioned already, there are seasons for this, seasons for that, and like there are seasons where you just need to answer those clients, because that's how you build up your reputation and you build trust with people.
Oh yeah.
And building trust is like literally everything. I think me and DK probably harped on this for a while when we did each other's podcasts. But like, yeah, building trust is everything. And, at a certain point, there's a time where you have to just like, where you're building up a clientele list, and you just need to be there and show them that you're there and you're reliable,
Oh yeah.
And then there's times where it's like, hey, like these are, these are like the limits.
The boundaries.
These are my boundaries, and I'm in a period now where I'm like trying to grow more, so my boundaries have been blurred a little bit more recently, and that's tough. But like, it'll come back.
Oh yeah, and that's kind of the cool thing. I don't know if DK had brought this one up before, so I hate to be like the second one bringing it up, but like,
sure.
We have a mutual friend, Bob Horn, super great guy, amazing mixing engineer. Like, dude's mixes are always like mind blowing, but
his low end is something else, right?
Dude, I get to master some of his mixes. He hires me a lot for mastering, and
that's amazing.
I kid you not, every time I get to, I end up texting him like, how the hell do you keep doing this with your low end? And I noticed his assistant Shock has been amazing at his mixes too. He's like, and all this to bring up, like, part of the structure that I've noticed he has for his business surrounds a previous issue, which was like I could be misquoting this, but from what I remember, he had a stroke in the middle of a session.
Oh shit.
Yeah, but this was also like years ago. So like there's been changes to his habits, his lifestyle, and the way he moves to actually accommodate a lower stress level and more time at home, being able to like sleep more often and things like that, being able to take time for himself, because he's actually told us, I made more money when I put up more restrictions and I live a happier life, and that's that. It's kind of an interesting concept in our industry, because where you hear it all the time, like Tizio went on Pensado's place and they talked about how he once left a golf tournament, and he ended up losing when he could have won, to go to a session with Chris Brown. Now, ultimately, I would say it seems like it worked out for him. Obviously, like, dude's got every number one hit you could ask for under the sun. But like, I also know this guy is extremely hardworking and willing to push to that level, but there's not a lot of people who necessarily are looking for that. Like me, my version of success is being able to say, I went home, I paid my bills, my wife is happy. Like I'm engaged right now, but you know, she will be my wife. And as long as she's happy, thank you. Yeah. As long as she's happy and I can stay afloat and I can still teach my interns. Like I give 8 hours worth of lessons a week for free to my interns on an individual level. Like they can schedule it out during my office hours on the calendar. They don't have to ask me. They can just schedule it. And it's free. And that's kind of the cool thing. Like as long as I can continue to do things like this, I've seen where my interns have like my first intern, Tyson and his friends over at Forever the Family, you know, it's a beautiful team, honestly. They just got their first movie placement as a team. And these are some of the first people I actually got to help out, as Tyson was one of my first interns here at In the Mix. And it feels really cool to me to be able to say I was able to help and better somebody else's life. And for me, it's not about driving the Ferrari. It's about, you know, my version of success is being able to help build it. Like I got my gold plaque and I'm a voting member of the Grammys and all that. And that's great. But it doesn't feel as cool to me as being able to say, wow, I positively impacted somebody else's life. As long as I can pay my bills, have a happy life at home, like I'm good. Yeah. I'm sitting pretty.
I resonate with that. I guess I have a little pushback on that. I mean, that's really like exactly what I want also. And like, I get so much joy from delivering a product that people are happy with. I love pleasing my clients, the artists I work with. And, you know, like that just gives me joy. Like I love knowing that I've been on the support team and like made it happen. Like I don't want to be front and center. I'm a bass player. That's my personality. It's also how I, you know, that's my approach to production also. Like I'm here, I'm the support role and I love that. But my pushback to that would be like the people that do aim higher seem to get a little bit higher. So it's like, you know, like that.
Oh, absolutely.
There's like that quote, you know, reach for the stars, get to the moon. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you reach higher, like maybe not like setting limited goals of like, hey, like I just want to like, you know, support my family with this music is not enough to really get to those numbers where you do need to support your family with the music. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
I think that's where the misconception lands though, because in order to support your family, you do still need to reach far. Yes. Now, no matter what the accolade is, you need them in order to have a constant resume that continues to update. Have you ever seen somebody's resume that's like, I worked with Christina Aguilera? It's like, really? On her new album? It's like, no, like 20 years ago. It's like, oh, then what does it matter now? Like, what have you been doing for the last 20 years? You still have to reach, you still have to work. But the way you do it can change.
Right.
You can set more limitations, and that won't actually stop your accolades. There's a song that I worked on with like Cedric the Entertainer like a month ago. And like for me growing up, The Kings of Comedy was the best thing for me to watch. So to be able to say I was working with Cedric the Entertainer on an album like was, mind blowing for me.
Yeah.
And then the month before that, I was working on songs that are going to be in the upcoming Keisha Cole movie, as she's a personal client of mine. Like these accolades don't necessarily stop if you do good business and you structure yourself right.
Right.
But you never stop reaching for those goals. But you don't have to kill yourself in the process is the main goal.
Right.
If you're trying to start a family,
find a good balance, right?
Yep, it's that work-life balance, and it's the hardest thing, and it's everybody's regret at the end of their life.
Yes, that's it's true. I mean, I interviewed Benny Facconi.
Oh yeah,
who's amazing, and I mean he worked on the big Santana record that I love and grew up listening to. You know what I mean? Like he's amazing. He has like 17 Grammys or something, and he told me, he's like, my one regret is like I didn't take the time to enjoy doing all these things. I was like, flying to like Buenos Aires, I was going here, there, and the other, and like, I just like went right back on a plane to go, back to the next gig instead of like, reveling in everything that's happening, seeing a new country, and it's like, it's totally, makes so much sense,
Oh yeah, like I remember the time I went to New York.
It's precious, this life.
Yeah, it really is. Like I remember going to New York once, and I had a 24-hour stay, literally 24 exact hours from get off the plane to get on the plane. And I had the option of like just do the job, go to sleep, and get back on the plane. But I decided, I'm like, I don't know the next time I'll be in New York. So instead of sleeping, I just got on the phone with my fiance and I walked around New York. And I remember, I kid you not, this was if there was a soundtrack for New York for me, it wasn't a New Yorker's soundtrack. It was Terrace Martin on Sounds of Crenshaw album. And I think it's like tacos something, turkey tacos or something like that. I forget the name of the track, but it's like this really dope groove. And I just walked through New York, and like you kind of have to recognize when you're in a moment that you may not be able to recreate.
Yeah.
And that's like, I feel like the main regret that a lot of people have is like that, like we work so hard trying to hit these goals, and that's totally okay. Like, I kid you not, I want to hit a Grammy. I would love it. But I'm not about to do 5 days in a row of 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. for it. Right. I know that there's people who will, and that's totally fine with me.
But you know what? You're willing to take the long game, right? It's the long game approach.
I am.
Right?
I want to enjoy the process. I don't want to regret the process.
That's exactly where I'm at. I kind of came to this realization like 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. I was like, I'm not where I want to be. And if I'm just always trying to get to where I want to be, then I'm going to be miserable. Or I could just enjoy the process of learning and getting better and know that, if you just keep at it long enough, you'll get at least towards that destination. And you'll hopefully not, be killing yourself in the process. So, like that's
think
kind
about
of
like growth as a creative, like if you as an instrumentalist yourself, there's time when you practice your scales, and that gets your dexterity in order, but it doesn't necessarily practice like, why don't we try different chord structures and see if we can come up with a melody with it? Running your scales will help with the dexterity, but it won't necessarily help with like the creative writing, but it will help on some level during that creative writing, right? Because it's like, okay, I'm actually a little more fluid in the way I can perform and this and that, which means I have a little more tools in the arsenal to reach from. But as engineers, if we're just tuning vocals all day and that's what we call succeeding in audio, right? We just pay our bills and we can go home. There's a cap, there's a limit. You're just tuning vocals all day. So you never really excel at mixing at a certain point. You never really excel at mastering at a certain point because you never really reached outside of your box. But I feel like the times when we do get to do that is when we're being most creative and free with the time that we have and the projects that we're working on. The importance of looking at it as there's times when you're mixing because you're getting paid to mix. And there's times when you're creatively mixing because the artist has a lot of trust and faith in your creative ear, right? But then you have to decide to take yourself out of that very Monday style of mixing, where you're just kind of like, okay, EQ the vocal here. Okay, it's cleaner. There we go. Move on. Whatever. Sometimes it's like, it'd be really cool if the vocal echo kind of like swirled in and out right now. Let's just kind of spend the next 20 minutes figuring that out. Let's see if we do something new. Like try to find something new, try to stay creative. But a lot of people just try to knock out record after record after record because they want the accolade more than they want the career.
Yeah. Well, they both give you reps, let me tell you.
They will. They both will. Yeah.
They both will give you reps. Yeah. It's true. Yeah. There's times for everything. I think we just keep going back to this, like the mantra of the seasons for this, seasons for that.
Yeah.
And totally. Well, Lou, we've just pontificated, and this has been amazing. Let introduce the audience to you a little bit more. I'm sure a lot of people have listened to you on the Mixing Music podcast and are familiar with you. But give us a brief like TLDR story about how you got into music production, audio engineering, the whole thing.
Sure. I guess you could say I was the high school douche that thought playing guitar would be cool and get me girls. It did not. But what it did do is actually introduce me to a lot of friends that were instrumentalists themselves, being drummers, bass players, vocalists, vocals being its own instrument in itself. But it was kind of cool because my best friend in high school, she really kind of told me, she's like, hey, like, you should actually like keep playing. It's actually really cool when you do. I'm like, okay, cool. And, I just kept playing one day, and then I started joining bands with my friends, playing a lot of shows. And it's kind of funny because this led to my love for engineering when I went through the same struggle that a lot of artists go through, which is, it's time to record. You're playing shows, you're trying to grow, and one of the things you're hearing from promoters is like, do you have any recordings we can listen to? Do you have any sales, any playlists, something? And, we're just 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds not knowing what we're doing.
Right.
And I'm like, no, why? Like, why? Like, we play a good show. We get booked at like House of Blues and stuff. Like, we're fine. And they're like, no, you still need recording. So I'm like, okay. So then like, I remember we got help from my uncle, and he sent us to a guy to record, and we were very excited about this, right? And we're thinking like, oh, this is going to sound great. And in reality, it was his garage. He had like a Yamaha MG mixer where it just does stereo recording. And it was 16 channels wide. And even to me at that time, I was like, whoa, no way. Then listening back to the recording, I was like, oh, it's not what we thought, and this kind of led down the rabbit hole eventually of me being like, okay, we've hired a few different people and we're getting better, but we're not exactly getting the results. Like, what if I were to take things into my own hands? And I sold my first amp that I really saved up money for, a half stack. And keep in mind, I was 18, so it's not like I saved up a ton of money. It's not like I had 30-year-old me bank account. But it was still, a lot to me. Like, and it actually kind of hurt to sell my first half stack. And just like many people who have to invest in their dreams, desires, and wants, sometimes you have to sacrifice one thing for another.
Absolutely.
So, I sacrificed my half stack for a Tascam US 200 interface and an SM57. I plugged it into my Sony Vaio laptop with 2 gigs of RAM. And like it had a whole 100.
That's not bad, right?
Yeah, right. A whole 100 gigs worth of hard drive space. Oh man, I was living big. And I get this, I was using the iHome speaker, right? Like where you dock your iPod on it,
yes,
right?
Yes.
You just like put it right in the front, and it had an aux cord input. So I used the headphone out of the interface and connected it to the aux cord input. Brilliant. Of that thing, and that was my first setup.
We all have to start somewhere.
We all started somewhere. I literally was in a garage with broken windows, like trying to record right next to the garage refrigerator that was just loud and old. And it was just really funny to me because it was one of those things where, like, looking back, I can't believe how frustrated I was still not understanding that there's still a very major difference between professional recording and home recording. Which led, like I said, down this giant rabbit hole that I'm kind of found myself in now, which is I started taking internships. I started taking on different jobs. I started working for like an audio AV company, for like a rental company and all this kind of stuff, and really falling in love with the process of learning about this. And I started like researching different engineers. One of them being, oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? Jack Joseph Pugue. And one of the biggest things that I started really finding fascinating about like getting into my career, and what really helped me kind of push to where I am now, is learning different people's mindsets, not the equipment that they used or the specific frequency band that they used to do one trick or another, but rather why the decision was made and why it felt so important to make that specific decision. Which has made kind of the projection of my career really launch from that. And nowadays, I build and design recording studios because I studied up on acoustic treatment and design, different construction styles and all that early on. And I actually have some history of construction myself, working as a kid. But now I build and design for everybody, for like Keisha Cole, Chris Brown, Trey Songz. I built Freddie Gibbs' studio. And right now I'm currently in the quote of like building 4 big ones for a TV network.
Wow.
Yeah. I've got my gold plaque with Keisha Cole and Kalani for the song All Me, which did really well, evidently. But that one came from building a relationship with Keisha, which was founded on the concept when we first met. She asked me, what do you want most? Like, why did you get into music? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to be happy. You know, is exactly what I told her. Like, I'm not really sure. Like, Ferraris aren't for me. I just want to be happy.
Yeah.
And she really resonated with that, because we all join music for that reason.
Right. It's our happy place.
Thankfully. Exactly. And because of that, you know, when I met DK, and we started in the mix studios together, he asked me a question that was, I think, very important to our relationship, which he said, what do you think the number one factor of success in a business is? And I told him community. And our company model is commercial quality, community feel. Because if it wasn't for this kind of basic understanding of like, you learn from each other, you know, you research other engineers, you research other musicians and producers, and you try to understand what's going on in their minds so that you can then take that information and apply it into your own life, which is a big factor for podcasts too. You know, like we want to learn from each other. We want to share this information. It's a free medium. 9 times out of 10, it's like exclusive content, sure, on one other side, but most people discover us through the free content, and that free content can actually help grow other people's lives. So like learning from other engineers was a huge factor. Understanding why I got into this was another factor. And then that community that I was able to build with just wanting to learn, to help, and just enjoy the process, help build that community that supports us in return. You know, we wouldn't be able to succeed 2 years later. Like, we started the studio in August, and during the pandemic, August 2020.
Perfect time to start a studio.
Right? Yeah, right. Totally the best time.
Yeah.
But had it not been for the mindset of like, I want to work with people, I want to offer a space that is not only just welcoming, but is of a professional standard. I still to this day get compliments on our recording quality compared to that of like studios that are charging 10 times our rate. In fact, I find out all the times, like I've had like clients walk up to me and be like, hey, we went to a studio with a C800G, BAE 1073, blah, blah, blah. And they shake our hand. They're like, you know, I took your engineer to another studio to work with me to finish up a song. We started here, and like immediately I could tell the difference. Like, we ended up not recording the song anymore because we could hear that difference. And it's not to like gloat about the studio, like we've come so far, we got great gear, but it's rather that focus on my end of like wanting to provide for others more than to provide for myself, and buying equipment that would serve others, moving in a direction that would serve others more than myself, has led to that like success where I'm at now. Like, I really don't think I'd have any of the accolades, like being part of the Grammys. I don't think I would have had that without said community. You know, when I got offered to be in the Grammys, DK became a voting member one year, and then he gave me my nomination from his end. And then a friend of mine, Relevant, really dope producer, who I'd known for years, you know, I hit him up and like, hey, I'm trying to become part of the Grammys. Do you think you could help me out? He's like, immediately, yes. yeah, just send me your email and I'll take care of it. I'm like, great. Sure enough, I've watched people like beg for nominations. I've never had to beg, but it's because I've always looked to help others and never asked for anything in return.
Right.
And the one time I did,
you've built up so much, like, I don't know what the word is, but like
I would say rapport,
goodwill. Yeah, goodwill.
Yeah, goodwill.
Rapport. Yeah.
You
Totally.
know, that the one time I needed help on something, it wasn't a stretch to say I need to do all this work to be able to get there. And I think that's where I'm at today. I think the Lou today came from being the guitarist the Lou today is the guitarist that grew up and fell in love with the process of the creative side of him. Found a way to turn it into a career, thankfully, and it all succeeded because of my want to work as a community. You join a band, that's your community. Your guitarist, your bass player, your singer. If you have problems with each other, work it out, because you never know. Like, hey, the guy I used to do free work with, the reason I became Ari Lennox's personal engineer for a while, fun fact, it came from free work. And it's not to say do work for free for opportunities. That's not it at all. A friend of mine, Bright Ma from Feature Music, he does placements with like K-pop stuff nowadays, but he would travel the world and all that kind of stuff, trying to make connections, and he was at a very beginner stage himself as well. He introduced me to DJ Ice one day, and DJ Ice is Boz's personal engineer, so Boz from Dreamville, but Boz wasn't part of Dreamville at the time. He hadn't been signed to Dreamville at the time. We just knew him as DJ Ice, and he works with a client named Boz. But the cool thing was this, me and Bright agreed to do a meeting. We meet for boba one day, and they want to talk to me about a project where they're helping this artist named Des Flores. And, I was curious, and I was like, sure, let me hear this out. And DJ Ice happened to be there because he was the one producing the project. And we got along. We immediately started talking, and we're like, okay, cool. They're like, we honestly have zero budget. We don't have anything we can offer. I'm like, you know what? If you can include me on the back end, like, I'm happy to take the opportunity and just kind of see where it goes, and we'll just leave it open-ended for now, just once again, just trying to help people out. Like, I understand the no budget. It sucked for me to sell my amp that I worked so hard to get.
Right.
Washing tons of dishes for countless hours, but,
yeah,
it was cool because, like, after working for the first time, me and Ice realized how well we worked together after the first hour.
Yeah.
And since then, we've been friends. To this day, we're still friends. But when Boz got signed to Dreamville, he was being hired a lot to work out of Dreamville's main studio here in LA. And then Ari Lennox moved into town, and they're like, hey, I know that you work with Boz a lot, and I'm not trying to split your time up between him and other artists. Like, do you know of any other engineers you could recommend? At that time, me and Ice have never exchanged a dollar, but because of our relationship and our enjoyment of working together off of a genuine just want to support each other and support artists that we believe in, he gave me an opportunity, and Dreamville from then on started paying me $50 an hour. There was just label checks all the time, and for months we were doing fine. And this was right before the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, the cool thing is everybody at Dreamville knew who I was and that I was more of a supportive type, that there was more work. Even when the pandemic hit, they started hitting me up for microphones and compressors and interfaces and computers during the pandemic, because they knew I was also the guy that outfitted people's studios. It just all stemmed from wanting to help one person, that all these other opportunities with the label and working with these amazing artists that came from, like, just supporting your local area artists.
Yeah.
And the want to do it, whether you're paid or not. Do what you believe in. Don't take every project for free. But, if you see something you like, you never know where it can lead you, even if it's not directly involved with that person.
Yeah. And the community thing is so big. And it's funny. Like, I've mentioned this so many times already on the podcast, but, like, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now, or, like, interviewing people and trying to meet people, if I hadn't gone to an AES. Because that was the moment. Because I was like a man cave guy, it was just like in my little zone, not interacting with anybody else, not knowing if I'm doing a good job, or if anything, if I'm in the right direction at all. And I went to AES. I was like, oh, they're just like me. I could really hang out with other people that do audio and do music production. And, like, we can learn from each other. And, getting to meet other people through my podcast has been the best thing. Like, and then, learning from them, talking to them, meeting them, building relationships. Like, it's so huge. And, like, it's just important to, like, seek out other people and you never know what you're going to do. Like, I also like, because I have friends that also work, in music production in my area. Like I have, I refer people to my friends. They refer other people to me. Like,
Yep.
you have to kind of get in and mix,
Have you ever read the book, The Go-Giver?
I haven't, but I've heard about it countless times, and I was thinking that you are a go-giver as you were talking.
So it's kind of funny because like me and DK met at NAMM. So you mentioned AES. Me and DK's story of meeting is actually at NAMM.
Nice.
And our meeting was because of his podcast, the Mixing Music Podcast, which was still like, I think less than a year old or maybe just about a year old. And then when we opened the studio together, he asked me to co-host with him. And now the majority of the time of the existence of the podcast, I've been on it with him. And
I thought you were. I thought you were from day one.
No, I wish. I think it would have been on a personal level cooler, but we didn't know each other at the time. And it's kind of cool because like, me and DK actually met because of this podcast and because of the sense of wanting to like always help people on my end. I've always kind of felt it weird when I don't invite people or be welcoming to people, And so I remember when we met, DK originally showed up to the Antares booth because I represent Antares whenever I'm at NAMM. Mm-hmm. He came by, he's like, hey, is Henrik there? One of the reps for Antares that had been on his podcast. And I was like, oh, you know what? He's on lunch right now. He's like, oh, that's okay. Do you know how long you'll be? I'm like, yeah, about like 15, 20 minutes. He's like, do you mind if I just like wait here? I'm like, no, I totally don't mind. Make yourself at home. And he's like, okay. And then immediately proceeded to just sit down. And not weirdly like in front of me, but like at one of the little seats and just looked at his phone. And I was like, so I'm Lou. What's your name? And like we just started talking, and like a very premature couple, we opened a studio later, 6 months later, Yeah. It's like, want to move in together? No, like in serious, like we had talked and met a little bit after NAMM again, and we had both mentioned how we're both looking for a property for us to do a studio. He was from Utah, moving to LA, and so he had been making his plan to come out, and I think it was just mutually beneficial for the two of us to kind of get a property together. It would lower our overhead, and we could each potentially have our own space. And we both really liked being in each other's presence, so that was really cool. But after working together and having that conversation about community, he did bring up the Go-Giver to me, and he's like, "Hey, you have a very natural inclination to act in a way that this book, The Go-Giver, seems to mention." And I didn't really understand what he meant. And so I kind of like brushed it off as like a compliment, because I was like, well, if it's called The Go-Giver, it's got to be a good thing, DK's significantly much better read than I am. But once I actually got around to actually getting to the book, I kind of started understanding why our relationship works. DK is a very driven type. I'm a very given type, and we're both very driven, right? But sometimes you need that kind of like pushback on concepts. And my pushback has always been like, how does this help other people? Like, I don't know if I like this idea. I don't see how it benefits other people. Because sometimes we'll think about things as business people as like, how does this help the studio? But sometimes helping others helps you out more. And the Go-Giver talks a lot about how in the concept of like, let's say coming up with the product idea, if you were to say, I really like your coffee, I think you can make millions if you were to sell it. It's very different than saying, wow, that coffee is really good. You should find a way to get it to the people.
Right.
It's a very different conversation because one is solely based off of the idea that you should be able to profit from this. And the other one is you should find a way to spread.
Yeah.
Whether it be free or whatever, just find a way to spread because this is so good, you should share it. And that's what I thought was so great about like, this music community personally, like coming up in it as a guitarist, like there was a lot of the older generation just trying to teach me how to play guitar better. And they're like, oh, that's really cool. I was like, yeah, I'm really trying to practice my scales, this and that. And like, I was just an aspiring kid wanting to learn how to play guitar better. And the older generation was the ones that were like, here, you should try it like this. And I was like, really? Okay. And I would try it. And they'd be like, did you know that you can play the same song in a different key if you were to play it like this? And I'd be like, oh, I never knew about doing things like that. And that would improve my music writing.
Yeah.
And it was this sense of people wanting to pass along information that was so inspiring, to want to be just like them. I had my first business partner. The first studio I ever opened was when I was like 21, 22. My next door neighbor, literally wall to wall neighbor, was the rapper The Game.
Oh, really?
He was my neighbor for 5 years at my studio. So from 25 to 26, we had a studio right next door to each other. And because of that, my business partner at the time, Goldie from MeFly, he was always so generous in the idea of like, I understand you're young, I understand you're learning. He had quite a few years ahead of me in the game, right? But he never stopped trying to help me grow. And he would always tell me, hey, as long as you progress, it's all good to me. At one point, he and his team had offered to pay for me to go to school because he said this would improve us as a unit. And that wouldn't benefit me as an individual. That would benefit us all.
Right.
And so this whole mentality of like looking at things as how can we all help each other?
Right.
Like I said, was just so awe-inspiring. Like in Latin culture, you see a lot of like, oh, machista, you do it on your own. Don't accept help from others. It's weak if you do. But seeing how fast you're able to progress, how fast you're able to grow, and how much influence you can actually have if you were able to spread without concern of return, actually yields more results. You make more money that way. I hate to admit it, but part of the Go-Giver is also the final chapter talks about understanding that you need to also receive. If you constantly give and never receive, you run yourself dry. So being able to keep the mentality of, hey, you may not receive on this one individual instance, but I'm sure that down the line you can. Now you can figure out how that works. You can say, on the podcast, I'm able to help thousands of people. And, once I do and people really reciprocate this notion that I'm doing this, they might want to buy merch down the line. They may want to get premium services, and that's cool. Another thing is there's also sponsored ads and things of that nature. So necessarily helping people out by creating this content, YouTubers do this all the time, it's not necessarily that you're wasting your time doing something that doesn't have an immediate payout, but sometimes being able to share your knowledge and share your growth, share your experiences is the product,
right,
that later can build. And when you do that with, let's say, your intern staff, like in my case, I recently got an opportunity to actually, master an entire album for one of my old interns. And it was only because we had built that relationship. He saw me as kind of I'm not going to say father figure at all, but as the industry, paternal figure of like, here, let me teach you about this. Let me give you these opportunities. Let me put you in the room with these people. Every time they call me and they have a question, I'm happy to answer it. They're in the middle of a studio session and something's wrong. Here, let me help you solve the problem, So when it came, hey, I need a mastering engineer for this, he's like, I know who to go to.
Yeah.
Every time I call him, he's always got me covered. And it doesn't mean that you have to throw out your schedule just to help every individual person. It's just, give what you can, and just know that it's understood. The right people will receive that and just kind of do the right thing with it. Sometimes they'll spread the wealth, right? You see it all the time on Reddit where somebody was given a free computer. So they'll drop it off at their college in the library and say free computer for anybody that doesn't meet the income requirements or something. There's always people trying to help and pay it back.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, that's made me more money than anything else in this industry.
Right. I think it's also like going back to like the building trust thing, which is the most important thing. It's like when you are available to all these people to help them out, in all these scenarios, you've built trust with them. You know what I mean? In the podcast, harping on the topics you guys harp on and coming with amazing free content every single week. You've built trust with your listeners, right? All these things is just like you're building trust because yeah, people trust you now because you've given them so much, so much amazing value and I hate to use the word value, but you've helped them so much that like obviously you're the first choice, Yeah. It's
and you become kind of like a trusted voice.
Exactly. Yeah, trusted voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I'm all about it. The go-giver mentality. We got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, if you check out the book, I promise you this, on Audible, it's worth it.
on Audible. I really should get to Audible because I would probably get through books if I actually did Audible. I always want to read and I never
poorly
read.
narrated.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah, but Go Giver was really well narrated. It's only 2 hours to go through the entire book on Audible. So if you have like a day where you're just like, you know what, for an hour I'm just gonna clean and do something, just pop on some headphones and listen to it. And I'll be honest, it's very entertaining to listen to. Like it keeps you like I have really bad ADHD. It kept me sucked in. So I'm sure the writing style is well enough for anybody.
Yeah. If you're like the benchmark for attention spans, totally amazing. Yeah. That's awesome, dude. Thank you for sharing all that. Let's get a little technical. I feel like it wouldn't be Secret Sonics if we don't go a little bit into the Sonics. Although I love all the pontification guru stuff. I don't want to say guru. You know what I'm saying? The philosophical end of things. Yeah. Like I'm more about that. But I do want to get a little bit into some technical stuff with you. So before we get into monitoring, because we mentioned we're going to talk about that. Let's talk about low end. In the masters I heard, low end was ginormous, kind of like Bob Horn style. What's your, do you have any philosophies when it comes to low end, how to get it big and also still loud?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because sometimes I get in trouble for it. I remember I was sent a song by a group called 12 Feet Tall. If you or anybody listening hasn't heard them before, definitely would recommend checking them out. Man, why am I blanking on the name? But a good example of like sometimes knowing when to leave it alone because it's good enough on the low end is one of their most recent releases. I'll remember it and I'll send it for you for a description.
Should I search on Spotify right now?
Yeah, let's see.
12 foot tall?
Because 12 feet tall.
12 feet tall.
Yeah, but it's a really good song and they make amazing music. And the cool thing is like I'm listening to it and I'm like, wow, this 808 is amazing. I wish it could be flourished a little more. But then, sometimes flourishing it too much actually takes away from the record. So the first revision I got from them was like, wow, this thing is almost like violently loud. And I was like, kind of like cheering myself on, like, yeah, that's kind of what everybody always wants, right? Like It sounds clear, but it's almost like boom, right? But for them, it just didn't seem to fit the bill. I have.
I'll tell you, it could be Lucky Ones or Between Tests, or I'm just looking through Denial.
It sounds like a name. I think it starts with a C.
Circling.
It'd be on the most, not circling. Oh man, what is it?
All right, never mind. With a C, with a C, 1,000. I'm just going.
See, 12 feet tall. Let me see. Artist.
We'll do a little edit.
Yeah, I'm like, wait a minute. Is it literally the number 12 and then FT tall?
That's what That's what I wrote. But maybe there's another. Maybe I'm in the wrong band.
See. Hold on. I know. Do you know FilePass?
Yes.
Yeah. Thankfully I use FilePass, so I can always just check my FilePass.
You'll have to. We could do it later. Also, I think it's got to be 12, like the number, and then like this seems like it could be the artist.
Oh, Okesia. It starts with the letter O. Oh my God.
Which album is When I Was a Ghost? No.
No, it's a single.
Okesia? I don't see it.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me check YouTube because I know there's a music video for it. Let's see. Okesia. 12 feet tall. Unless the song's not out yet.
Maybe it's not out yet.
Maybe not. I'm not seeing it.
All right, let's do a quick little edit. It's all good.
All right. Where do we start off from on this edit?
Wherever you were like in the mid sentence, I cut you off looking for the song.
No, you're all good.
Oh, so it didn't fit the vibe. It didn't fit the vibe they were going for.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I guess maybe the song may not be out, but essentially they had told me like, hey, we like what you did. It sounds good, but it's just kind of, it feels like it's taking away from the guitars, you know? And so part of like being a mastering engineer that is kind of gunning for like impressive sounds and everything, because I'm obviously not trying to remix the song. That's probably the biggest misconception of mastering. It's very important to kind of understand where the low end is actually supposed to be in the context of the mix's relationship of all of its elements. So with Bob Horn, he's very much well known for his low end, right? And sometimes you have to know, like Bob will allow me to flourish if I need to. At the end of the day, as long as the client is happy, he's happy. And then sometimes he'll let me know when he wants certain changes or certain levels of avoidance, right? But there's a lot of jazz cats that he sends me, and the jazz cats love working with me because they're like, oh, I really want to feel that kick and that bass. Like, it's got to be grooving, this and that. And sometimes that low end has to be very pronounced. Now, it happens in two ways. There's a bassist named Sekou Bunch. Sekou Bunch is amazing jazz guy. This guy is insanely in love with his low end so much that like if that bass isn't rocking but in a clean sense, like it can't be distorted, like you could distort it a little bit, give it that snarl, but I have to somehow get the low end to be that much more enhanced on a 2-track without changing the mix. And to be honest, it's a combination of a couple different tools. But there's also guys like Silas White where he's like, yo, I love Bob's mix. I want to enhance, but I don't want to change. You know, so in the Sekou
what does that mean?
Realm, exactly, right. The fun part about mastering is like you're the final ear for a translation, right?
Yeah.
But that's not always your job. Sometimes you're actually being sought after to make changes that enhance the record and also make sure that it translates and all that. But you're not technically supposed to remix the song. In the Sekou front, like he wants to hear everything. He might listen to it and be like, I like the bass. I like what you did. But the horns don't feel like they're on top of the mix anymore. So now you're kind of modifying the upper mid range and you're doing other things. In the Sekou front, he's hiring me to make changes to the 2-track because he loves the mix, but he knows there's that extra like 5% that, you know, we could really push it. And in his case, my tricks for like mastering songs and trying to shape the low end usually round off to like 3 types of tools. It's saturation. It's I guess you could say, I don't know what the name is for it, but it's almost like the Poltekish trick with the voice of God. It's kind of like that slope / bell.
Right.
And then lastly, it's a lot of like dynamic expansion, using like multi-band expansion from Fab Filter. And I can kind of explain this one a little bit more
with the Pro MB.
Yeah. So
I'd love to hear about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So and it's kind of funny. I'll call it the Sekou method and the Silas method because these two clients both do jazz, and they both want enhancements, but they want them in very different ways.
Okay.
So in the Sekou method, which is enhancements that change the record for the benefit of the creative good, versus, I guess you could say, the technical only. Using a combination of like saturation, filtering through like voice of God, and I call it filtering instead of like enhancement for a very specific reason, is actually really important. So in saturation, right, you're adding other harmonics to the actual range, whether that be even order, odd order, or even just forms of distortion,
right?
Where it's a little bit chaotic sometimes. So with Sekou, he wants to hear his bass pronounced. So the funny thing is with like a lot of live bass players, it's not always about the thumpy, subby lows because a lot of times that's what's kind of clouding the mix. But it is a characteristic that's kind of still sought after. So knowing where to actually saturate and how to actually approach the saturation is extremely important in the master process because you could ultimately destroy the low end. Right. What I like to do a lot of times, this changes song to song depending on what the vibe is, but if I was working with Sekou specifically, I know he likes his subs really round in the lows. Like he wants that almost perfect sine wave low sub frequencies. And he also likes it to feel like it's full, but not booming and out of control. He is very all about tight low end. So I actually will take a saturation plugin, let's say like Saturn. and I will just disable everything under 50 hertz, maybe even 60 hertz. I just don't want the plugin to do any kind of harmonic change to that at all. Like, just forget about it. It doesn't exist. I will actually listen for the notation range of the song, because every song is a different key. The notation range is different. And especially depending on the bass player, you might have one that's doing like slap bass. So he's got a little bit of upper mids going on or something. But Sekou is all over the map. But he is all about making sure the dexterity in his finger playing down low is actually there. So a lot of times I'm actually saturating ranges between like 80 hertz to like 200 hertz, which is actually a range of the bass that not a lot of people are listening for. But if you think about like the pluck, the transient is usually around 100 hertz to 120 hertz. Sometimes people will scoop out a little bit of that like 150 to 200 because that's kind of like that muddy kind of boomy range.
Sure.
But there's a lot of dexterity in the playing that's kind of lost in there sometimes. Because if you think about like how we scoop out for the kick and all that, parallel compression for the kick and all that kind of stuff. In jazz, if you do too much parallel compression, it becomes very audible because they're looking for definition in those ranges. And if you know Bob Horn's mixing, you know that he worked really hard on getting that low end to sound a certain way.
Oh, yeah.
So losing transients is not an option. So overcompressing is not really an option. But if the goal is to get it loud, adding too many dynamics back is also kind of counterintuitive, isn't it?
Right.
So at saturation, what you're looking to do is trying to get harmonics that highlight ranges that are much more audible, whether it be on the phone, earphones, and I say earphones as like AirPods or like little buds.
Yeah.
Because things like speakers in a well-tuned room will always reproduce it, but you forget that Skull Candy is the #1 selling headphone at Target. Let's be honest. It's a $5 headphone. It looks cool, and high schoolers love it.
Wow.
So if that's the medium,
I was thinking AirPods, but whatever.
Skull Candy. Hey, Skull Candy sells out, and they sponsor surf competitions. I don't see Apple sponsoring them. But overall, it's kind of interesting because like you see people focusing on the subs, but the subs are the hardest to translate on every system. Low mids are not, but there's a lot of dexterity found in that. So if you saturate, let's say with like a tube saturation style, you're adding kind of like a rounding level of compression, right? Well, on Saturn, you can actually choose to dial in or back the level of actual saturation that's happening, whether it be more on the transient or on the overall signal. If you dial it back to the transient a little bit and saturate where the plucking is actually happening, forget about the low definition. Remember, we're going after the playability and actually hearing the detail in the notation.
Yeah.
If you do that in the range of the kick drum and the actual bass playing and only saturate in that range and actually add just enough to have a little bit of grit, just to, you don't want to hear it necessarily. You want to feel it.
Right.
You can actually get a little more definition out of each little note that's there without having to do a broad saturation. So remember, you're pulling Saturn back or plugins that allow you to change the envelope of the saturation. If you pull that back enough to where it only really happens on the transient and not on the overall signal, then great. Because I know a lot of people use plugins like Decapitator when they're mixing.
Yeah.
But the downside with Decapitator is that it's a very broad saturation.
Super broad.
Radiator is a little more transient, which is kind of nice. But Radiator can be a little bit noisy sometimes and not always super desirable. So Saturn is one of those tools
always
that
turn
if
the
you're
noise.
Doing it on the master,
always turn that noise knob off on Radiator. Everybody,
yes,
PSA
Why
for the world.
Why did Sound Toys do that?
I know it's defaulted on, and I've gotten into trouble with it, and I think everyone has. So PSA, just turn it off. We don't need that. It's 2023, baby.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But once you get that saturation dialed in, like it's obviously something you have to listen for, and it's kind of hard to articulate verbally because it's one of those things like once you hear it, you're like, oh, boom, I got it. If you were to now start trying to shave some of the low end to actually resonate in that range a little more without getting boomy, the voice of God or a technique like it could actually help out. Now,
this is like when this is doing like the high pass filter, but with like you're setting the knob so it gets a little bumpy right before it drops out, kind of thing.
Exactly. And then depending on the actual intensity that you choose, it actually changes the envelope. So the reason this is kind of important is because if you use too much of it, you also cut too much of it. But if you're trying to enhance and make something a little more audible, then sometimes a give needs a take. So if you're trying to make sure that the low lows aren't getting wild and out of control, then it's a good idea to start tapering it a little bit. The voice of God does the Pultec trick, but with the idea of being a bit tighter and more natural. The Pultec trick was very kind of like loose. It wasn't actually planned. Actually, in fact, the manual says don't do it. You know, if you read the Pultec manual, it says, please do not do this. It's not intended. And then people were like, fuck it. You know, they're just like, let's go, you know. Yeah. But with that said, the voice of God trick actually works really well because in the original unit, it does add a level of saturation through the components. But essentially, you just get 2 dials and 2 buttons. One button says 40 hertz, and the other one says 100 hertz. And when you click them together, it becomes 200 hertz. And that basically sets the center frequency of the dial that says frequency. This is really important because that dial does not change numbers or anything. It just goes 0 to 10. So do you know what frequency you're on? Hell no. Hell no. And I love it for that reason.
You just use your ears.
Exactly. And the other one just says amplitude. And amplitude controls how much the bell curve is actually pushing up and how much the slope is pulling down.
Got it.
And it's a constantly variable one. So if you move it in one direction, you get more of a peak and a cut. And if you move it in the other, you get less. But the moment it's on and enabled, it's already doing a sort of cut. Even at the 0 point, it never goes back to flat. So using the voice of God has to be very intentional. But the great thing is this, you have to use your ear to set the frequency.
Yeah.
So you listen for a range that you're like, oh, I really want to enhance this range right here. But if you hit it to 2, you start noticing like, wow, it got dense, but it didn't get loud. It added density in a certain range.
Right.
But the reason it feels that way is that taper off on the low end.
Right.
That taper off, like everybody talks about like how mastering engineers always taper off the low end a little bit. And to be honest, it's true and not true. We actually look to not change too much. But sometimes if you're asking for certain loofs, it's kind of necessary. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're saying, oh, I want to hit -6 loofs on this EDM track, it's like, whoa.
You better cut.
How loud is your kick drum and bass right now?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be a pretty defining factor. Not to say that it can't be loud, just saying that depending how the mix is done, you know, how much clarity is there in the low to where if you were to taper it down and kind of smooth out other ranges, could it retain the same feel? Because at the end of the day, with mastering, you want to retain the mix and its quality. But with the Sekou method, you know, I'm obviously making changes that are creative changes to enhance a specific range. One could say, oh, send it back to the mixer, but that's not his goal. He likes what the mixer did, and he wants the mastering engineer to take it another step further with a different ear. Somebody who's going to listen to it differently than the mixer.
Totally.
And so once I've kind of dialed in the voice of God to a range where it's like, okay, I can feel the thumping of the notation. Like, I want to feel that. That way, when people are listening to the groove of the song, they're listening to the groove of the notation and not the rumble of the subs.
Right.
But the subs are still there because voice of God just does this magical thing. I just love it. But lastly, you want to do some type of like transient shaping, whether that be low end focus from Ozone, which everybody with Ozone has if they have the bundle, or you can do what I like to do, which is like kind of have selective push, meaning that if you use Pro MB from FabFilter, there's actually the advanced mode button on the range that you select, and if you notice, there's actually a button that's called free. And it's not Freebird, it's free range. Really important factor about this is that you can now tell it to trigger based off of another frequency range not related to the one that you're affecting. So let's say that you wanted the snare to have a little more thump in the master. You could actually say, well, the thump is in this range, but the crack of the snare, the audible part of it, is actually much higher in the range, not even close to where the thump is. So I can't just put a transient designer and hope it will get that one spot that has nothing to do with the one that we can normally hear pretty easily. So with the free range mode, let's say that you wanted the snare to pop. Let's say that you've enhanced the low end, but now it's starting to feel like the snare just doesn't have enough thump to it as well. You could actually highlight the range and set it to expand mode and maybe boost it like 3 dB, because you're never going to get the full 3 dB unless you put the threshold at an extreme amount. And just click free range and go to where the sound of the crack of the snare is. And that way, every time the crack goes above a certain threshold, it'll automatically push the thumping range up with it. You know what I mean? Using one section of the actual song to actually affect another section of the song. So with low end, let's say that you want the kick to stand out a little more in the master. You can say dip the low end every time this range of the kick is hit. So let's say the kick is at 100 hertz. You can say everything below 40 hertz gets dipped down every time the kick hits. That way I'm not trying to clash how much transient information from the lows is actually hitting the limiter. I can have one be prioritized in a certain moment. Let's say that
I love that.
the bass is actually needing a little bit of love on a certain solo part. You can automate to where it's like, oh, when it goes up in this range and he goes up on the scales, right? Like he's up on that fretboard, he's doing the bass solo, but because he's up on the fretboard, maybe it just doesn't have as much presence in the lows. You can kind of make it to where as that notation is playing, and as long as you set the threshold well enough, you can always automate the threshold. But you can actually have it to where it kind of boosts that range that his body is in, and have that kind of be the supportive tone to the solo. But it's kind of funny with those three tools. Like I can usually get the low end where I need it to be as a mastering engineer, and I'm obviously not going for like 6 decibel boost or anything. It's usually like 1 decibel boost. Like
I'm sure.
Like at most, I'm trying to do a decibel. But the cool thing is that this give and take method of like, okay, I'm saturating it. It's adding a form of compression to this range, but it's adding more of an audible range. With the actual curving, I'm tapering off some of the lows so it doesn't get muddy, but I'm also enhancing a range that kind of needs a little more support or density. And then with the multi-band, I'm actually, oof, that was weird. But, you know, I'm,
it's not a double negative. So it's just a positive,
yeah, right?
positive.
It's just positive, which on opposite day, I guess, is negative. I don't know. We'll see. But,
Not sure.
It's kind of funny because like, you see a situation where, you know, we're adding transients back post saturation. You know what I mean? We're trying to get back what we've potentially lost. Because once again, mastering is all about preserving the mix, but enhancing to where the client wants it.
I see what you're saying.
The cool thing is like, you know, in doing all this low end focusing, like think about it, that's 3 plugins just focused around the low end. But the client is hearing the definition they're looking for. They're hearing the low end kind of fill out a little more than it was before. And because of this, like, let's be honest, as humans, we hear low end and we think it feels bigger because we perceive low end as closer to us. Like if you think about people in the wild,
right.
You hear some crackling in the woods, you think it's far away. But when you hear that crunch, it's like, oh crap, they're next to me. Yeah. You know, so when we hear low end in a mix or in a master, we kind of perceive it as like, wow, that's huge. But in reality, it might not actually be all that much low end, because one thing that's really good about Bob is he can somehow get things to sound full while still filtering out like 200 hertz. Wow. You know, he has so much room in the low end that you almost don't need to go through these tricks. So in like the Silas method, you know, enhancing without changing. You know, sometimes it's about finding resonating frequencies and finding some things that are masking and understanding where to actually get those things out of the way. So, for instance, like in a Silas record I was working on, you know, I guess the project's already been announced. It was it's an album with Cedric the Entertainer, and they've got everybody on it. Like they've got Michael Jackson's musicians on this, you know, and it sounds amazing. Bob mixed the whole thing, and I got to master the entire album, and it was great. In fact, I actually got to record one of them. Shock mixed it and then sent it back to me for mastering. Kind of a funny work. It's like you record it and then you master it, but there's somebody else mixing it, you know. Like it's such a weird U-turn. But the cool thing on this one is like Shock did really, really well on it. You know, he killed it, you know? And in fact, me and Shock were in communication the whole time, and he's like, hey, you know, like there's a couple of revisions and there was like stuff going back and forth. But the whole time that I was actually mastering it, every time I sent it back, he's like, so what did you do? I was like, oh, I just did some like resonant cutting and all that kind of stuff. I was looking for masking frequencies. I did a little bit of tapering in the low end, but I kind of brought it back. I just felt like it needed a little bit of this. He's like, no, it sounds good. But he never really had a note back because it was still his mix. Like there was changes, but the relationship of things didn't change. In the
Right.
Sekou method,
The
he
mixing
wanted
engineer
more
wants
low
us
end.
those balances as long as our balances are retained, you can enhance things in different ways, you know?
Exactly. So like in the Sekou method, I might use like the Studer A800 because I like what it does to the mids, and it'll smooth out that low end a little bit and give it kind of like this warm, smooth presence. But if I did that on the Silas record for Shock's mix, you know, it would have changed a lot of the mix and a lot of the work. And like, because he had sent me at one point like revision 3 and I was supposed to master that one, and it got all the way to like revision 7, not because his mix wasn't good, but because there was like last minute creative changes for the artist and the producer. And you know, on my end, you know, as a mastering engineer, I know there's a lot of mastering engineers who are like, well, once I mastered it, like that's it, you know. Your creative revision is another fee. On my end, I'm like, hey, I'm here for us to get this record done. I'm not saying let's do 1,000 revisions, but you know, send it over. You know, I'll take care of it. No worries. But with that said, I'm also acknowledging. Yeah.
It always makes the record better.
If you told somebody no revisions allowed,
not always.
Consider it not booked.
Almost always makes the record better.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And the funny thing is this, like, if you consider the number of revisions going on, you also had to consider the amount of work going into the master and how different it is after every revision. So imagine them saying, like, I feel like the horn is a little louder because your master made the horn a little louder. So now they're dropping it in the mix because of the master. That doesn't seem fair.
Right.
You know? So when you're looking to enhance without change, sometimes you might be talking about stereo width, but that could also play a factor in phase and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you might be talking about upward compression, which makes certain elements that were meant to keep down, make them louder and all that. Sometimes what changing without changing means is find a way to clear it up without changing the balance. You know, sometimes that means, you know, finding those resonant tones. Like I notice, for some reason, I always notice it around like 400 to 500 hertz. There's always seems to be some mud.
Yeah, build up.
I guess you could say there's a build up there, but like it's because like a lot of people want their vocal in that range. A lot of people want their guitar in that range. So a lot of bass players want that in their range. They want their kick drum in that range. Like obviously, like a lot of people filter out boxy tones out of their kick, but if you're dealing with like jazz, sometimes that boxy is the vibe.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's like that's kind of a frequency. It's an interesting frequency range, 400 hertz, because it's like that's kind of where you have the meat. You know what I mean? And like if you cut out too much of it, you lose the quality, like of a vocal.
Exactly.
You don't want to cut out. You gotta be very careful dipping out 400 hertz. Like I used to dip out more, and I'm doing it less and less and less these days because because you know that's where the character of the vocal is usually, and like yeah. I mean I'll cut it out usually on a kick if it's like a rock kind of track or something, but. Yeah, it's on the bass. I don't want to cut out 400 hertz like that. That's like a lot of that, you know, warm presence.
That's that snarl.
Yeah, it's like,
you're just like, I want to hear that.
I like 400 hertz on bass. I like 700 hertz on bass now. Also,
really? Yeah. Well, you know what? You get a lot of dexterity up there.
I'm kind of more of like a flats, warm bass kind of guy. That's my thing. That's my thing. Yeah. And for like the bass I'm using like let's say like 700 hertz on like let's say that Plug-in Alliance SSL-J, that thing that just brings out the pluck and like, you know, the presence of the bass. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, I don't know. It works much better on that SSL than like on the Pro Q. You know what I mean? I don't know why.
I think this is why like a lot of people want to have veteran engineers versus the new guys. And I think that kind of goes into like why some people choose a certain mastering engineer versus not. This level of experience that you gain over time also shows you like where certain elements exist that you might have realized in the past. Yeah. And because of this, your approach to what you consider mixing or mastering is very different. For instance, like there's always like Sterling mastering, right? And I've you know, shamelessly competed for certain masters against some of their guys like unknowingly. But once I found out, like, it's shameless that I was like, fuck yeah, that's right, I win. You know, but, like, it's not even on a competitive sense, and it's not about winning, right? But it's rather understanding what the client is after and interpreting whatever that is into your work. I've had, like, this big DJ guy. He does, like, huge electronic records, like, slamming it. He wants everything at -6. And the way you approach that is very different than just making it louder. You know, if you wanted louder versus a specific target, and you have to approach it with certain kind of like ranges in mind, like understanding how they play into loudness and perceived loudness. Like that's kind of a thing. So like finding that your pluck is actually a little bit nicer by boosting up that 700 hertz with a specific EQ is also part of what you're paying for when you're paying for these professionals to get involved, right?
Yeah.
That's why, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, I wouldn't call myself a Mike Tucci fan because I don't know him well enough, but I do know his work, and I do know he works with my friends like Tizio and all them. And though I would love to one day master songs for Tizio, I also know that Mike Tucci and Tizio go back a long time and they work together a lot. And I've never heard an issue with the masters. And because of this, I've also noticed that Mike Tucci masters completely in the box, which is kind of funny because I do too. But for a very different reason. He had analog gear for a long time, specifically for mastering. And when there was an issue and he could no longer have it, he just resorted to in the box and recreated his same workflow in the box and still gets magical results. And it's the thing that I appreciate so much about this is that it's because it comes from the ear of somebody who had and does not use anymore. He could probably recreate it. He could probably repurchase it again, but still he just sticks to a Hilo and his monitors and he's done, which is the perfect example of you don't need the gear.
Right.
You need the ear. So like when you're mastering a song in like the Silas method, it's not necessarily like mastering is all about this one compressor. In fact, I would say this is my big secret. I almost never use a compressor while mastering. Almost never.
Really?
Reason being is compression can change the glue of the mix, the relationship of the instruments. And so I'm always looking to enhance and not necessarily change. And it's not that I'm always looking to enhance. I actually, funny enough, like bringing up DK, he had me master a song for him once. And he said, if you're going to make any changes whatsoever, I'd rather you just send it back to me. I was like, okay. And so sure enough, I did a master and I sent it to him like, hey, these are the changes that I think were kind of necessary in what I was hearing. And he's like, I think they were too much. I was like, cool, no worries. Do your revision, send it back to me, and, we'll give it another go. Learning to not take things personally and just knowing that you're after their goal, not your own goal, is such a big factor in whether you succeed or not, whether you're a mixing or mastering engineer or anything. And that's what I really like about Mike Tucci. I've never heard anybody say like, oh, he mastered something and it's like, no, that's it and nothing else. Like he's always been a very good pleaser to his clients. Not to say that he's a pushover or anything whatsoever, but if he doesn't need his gear to hit such excellent results, there's no other excuse than you just haven't been training your ears.
Yeah.
Like what is the
just do the reps.
The interview that they did? Yeah. The interview that they have for him online is went from punk rock band to mastering engineer, which is perfect. Like it's more about the experience than it is about any specific genre, but it is also experience within that genre and understanding what goes into making a good song, a good output of a record, what is quality in the eyes of the public, and your job is to translate that.
Yeah.
And so like when going with the Silas method, you have to draw inspiration from that. You have to learn, okay, well, they worked so hard on this. They're on revision 7. Like, do I really want to go and change the mix because I think the bass can thump harder? Not really. Sometimes their low end is just great enough that you want to flourish it a little bit where it's like, okay, I'm hearing this. I'm hearing a little bit of congestion in this range. Let me cut a little bit of that congestion. Voila, the bass sounds bigger without having to do more than a 2 decibel cut in total.
Yeah.
And sometimes my masters are exactly that. I once was hired to master like an EP, and 2 songs, all they got was a thumbs up from me, and maybe a limiter. And they were perfectly fine with that. Like the engineer's like, hey, if you're going to make a lot of changes, just let me know what they are and let me see if I can change it in the mix. I'm like, totally cool. 2 of the songs, I sent them back some revision notes. I'm like, hey, I'm hearing some clouding in the vocal in this range. I'm hearing the kick clash with the bass in this range. I'm hearing the hi-hat is really poking up against the vocal. I did a small minor cut so you can kind of hear what I was hearing, and I sent you a file with it, that one specific frequency boosted, so you can hear what I'm hearing. So you have something to compare, like a before and after. But once they sent me back that revision, I'm like, that's perfect. He's like, all right, is there anything else that we need to change about it? I'm like, Nah, I think that you could taper it a little more and I could get a little more loudness. He's like, if you can do it in the master, that's fine. I'm like, okay. And just pretty much that. A small little taper after it. Like sometimes the relationship of knowing what they want and how to approach it is so important, because sometimes the low end that I get for people is just by sending them notes on,
Right.
hey,
I love
I'm
that.
hearing this clash.
Yeah, it's that communication thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love like communicating with the mastering engineer at the end of the process, because it just helps you have more confidence that this is going to be finished in the way you want it. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
great. And then
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like metal engineers who mix and then master their own thing so they can get ultimate loudness and adjust the mix while they're mastering, which is
Yep.
it's a similar thing, but a bit different. But like there's something to that probably, which actually kind of leads me to a new question for you, which I was thinking
Sure.
about, because I know you mix and master your own mixes
Yep.
sometimes. I have no idea how you can do that, because I literally have zero objectivity at the end of a mix. How does that work for you?
So I'm a big believer in committing, whether it's your relationship or your sound. Because I hate
Amen.
to say, but once you release it, you're married to it. You know, like
That's
you
it.
better commit. Like if you like it, you like it. Now, a good example of this for me is whenever I work on an album for an artist. I know I delivered a song to you for an artist named Jalen Rents, whose album I had to mix and master the entire thing. And the only way I could really separate the two roles is to mix the records as best as we possibly could with artists on site or off site, whether that's using audio movers or them sitting next to me. Really get it to a point where we're confident. If that means throwing a bus compressor on it as part of like the glue sound for the master bus, because I'm a big believer that there's a difference between master bus processing and mastering. They're two completely different roles.
Sure.
But if I did do any master bus processing, I wasn't gunning for a limiter on my master bus. I was gunning for how loud can I get it before mastering, how even out can I get it, how much noise and reduction can I get in the mix, like how many resonant frequencies, masking frequencies can I take out, because at the end of the day in mastering, I'm looking to correct any issues. And that's where like you mentioned, like there's a lot of these metal guys that will remix the song according to the master that they're currently doing, which is kind of not bad. It comes down to translation, because the more you apply a limiter, the more it changes, right?
Yep.
But if your goal was to be dynamic and loud, why not mix dynamic and loud? You know, if the goal of mastering is to not necessarily change the mix, then you definitely want to be in the realm of, I'm going to mix in the way that it should sound in the master. And when I get to the mastering stage, I'm only looking to find that one resonant tone that I have to pull down. For instance, like guitar chugs, 200 hertz every time. Mm-hmm. Guitar chugs with high distortion, it's always 200 hertz that's booming out. And I watched the video. I like going on Twitch sometimes and like just supporting other streamers. I'll go in, just say hi, because I know what it's like. I'll stream once in a while. Like one thing that I'll be starting in March is free mix feedback on Mondays. So like mix feedback Mondays on Twitch. And the reason I think this is so important is because like I've seen where like Twitch users, like they're asking the audience, right, in the chat, like, what should we do next? What should we do next? And somebody in the chat's always like, oh, you should dip like 6 decibels from like 200 hertz. That guitar chug is so loud. And, you know, it's like, you hear it and you're like, well, it's not that it's necessarily loud. It's just that it's very boomy. Like instead of dipping that frequency, why not just taper it? Why not just do this? And you kind of offer that advice of like how to kind of approach different problems in the mix, right? Really cool thing that I've found is that like there's a community of people that just kind of want to find the best solution in this. But it always comes back down to people trying to do this on the mix bus. Instead of doing it on the mix bus, you should be more trying to isolate it in the track. So for me, the separation of mixing and mastering is really just coming back to like, if you have to change it on the track, don't do it on the mix. Don't do it on the master. If you have to fix something because it's too boomy in the mix, don't do it on the master bus. Forget about the master bus processing. Use the master bus processing to enhance and flourish. Like certain EQs just do something magical.
Right, like a Moog or something. Yeah.
Exactly. They just have this like extra oomph. They add a certain level of saturation when you boost a certain range. And I'm a minimalist. Like I taught a masterclass this Saturday, and one of my favorite notes that I got back from one of the audience members while still mixing, they're like, you've only put one plug-in and maybe boosted 1 or 2 decibels on like a saturator or something. You haven't used EQ at all, and yet the mix sounds clear, loud, dynamic, punchy. And it's true. It's my intention, even while mixing, is to be a minimalist, because sometimes the natural sound is what we were after. As an instrumentalist, like I know as a guitarist, I chose my amp out.
Right.
I spent thousands on my amp and my guitar pedals.
Yeah. It's all intentional. Everything's intentional.
Exactly. Only for a mixer to come in and completely reshape my tone with an EQ. Like, I understand if I needed a little more excitement in the top end, like, couldn't you just give me that little bit of top end instead of cutting out my low mids and doing all this? Now, I understand that in the mix, for contextual reasons, you have to shape it. But how much you shape could ultimately just change the tone for the worse versus the better. You know, like, for instance, when you say you want to mix in context and not in solo, like that's such an important factor in mixing, which is not available in mastering. When you're in mastering, you have to listen to everything only in context. You have no choice of soloing. So if it sounds bad in the master, you should go back to the mix. So the way to separate it, honestly speaking, like just to keep it short, is like, if you feel like something's wrong in the master before you send it off to mastering, or before you start mastering it yourself, you should go back to the track that's causing the issue. And that could be hard. Sometimes you got to do the mute trick. Sometimes you got to do the solo trick, which is just soloing out certain ranges, like using tonal balance control on your master bus and literally just trying to telescope through it and find the range that seems to be standing out to you, and try to identify while in solo of that frequency range what it is that seems to be clouding it, and whatever's in that range, what needs to have dominance in that range. You know, let's say that there's a snare and I don't know, we'll say a snare and like a sample loop of like some percussion. What needs to translate there? Now you might say, oh, okay, well, EQ dip right there. It's like, well, you know, if you do a static EQ dip in the mix, unfortunately, you know, that frequency is just gone from that element. What if that loop doesn't constantly play in that range? Maybe what you're looking for is really some sidechain multiband compression, something that'll allow for that pocket of range, and maybe you set up a look ahead so that way it sounds natural, the little pocket that you create in the frequency spectrum for that snare to exist in out of that loop. You know, have the snare trigger the look ahead compression on just that range, and you'd be surprised. Sometimes the best trick is to do as little as possible, and that way you get these big sounding loud records because you're full of frequencies. You still have all this contextual sound going on. You didn't take it all away by doing like, oh, it's a vocal, cut everything below 150. It's like, well, hold on. What is clashing with the vocal below 150? Because if you wanted the vocals to sound bigger than life, then part of it is its body. Right. You can always use voice to God to enhance and flourish and all that later if you cut too much. But, you know, let's say that they recorded through a Telefunken 251. That microphone's beautiful. It sounds so good. Yeah. So why would you try to take everything away from it just out of a gut instinct and not because of what your ears told you? You know? So be careful. The separation of mixing and mastering. The separation of mixing and mastering is just knowing the difference between blending the mix together and then making sure that it's ready for output. When you're mastering, you want to look at the mix as a single 2-track if you can. You know, in Studio One, they have their mastering mode, which is really cool. But if you are in like Pro Tools, what I like to do is I like to print the track and then just make it the only track I can see. And then from there, anything that I need to change has to be on that 2-track. There's no going back to the mix, especially if the client has already approved the mix. If the client has already approved the mix, and let's say that, oh, well, there was a limiter on it. It's like, yeah, but if you were compressing like 4 decibels to get it that loud, chances are you had way too much transient info. And then now when you're trying to push it louder, you're going to lose even more transient info because that limiter was already cutting so much. You know, so if I do have a limiter on my mix bus, it's max doing like 0.5 to 1 decibel shaving, because the goal isn't necessarily to be so loud in the mix that I'm clipping. You just want to be perceived loud. So by the time you get to mastering, the limiter doesn't have to do as much work.
Yeah. Amazing. Oh, dude, this was so good. Man, I feel like I could talk to you about so many things, but I want to get to a couple other things before we wrap this episode, and it's getting late. But maybe we'll have to do a second episode at some point.
Yeah, I'm absolutely down for it.
Oh, sick, dude. I love it. What was I going to ask you? So let's talk a little bit about monitoring. How are you monitoring today? Because we kind of went on a little riff before we started recording about headphones, and I just got these Bear Dynamic 770 Pros, and you were talking about how there's something nice about them because of the mid range is so forward. Give us a little spiel about how you're monitoring, and maybe you could get into that kind of the headphone thing.
Sure. So I'm sure anybody that's worked in music long enough has been in a loud room before and their ears have been fatigued. And I'm sure they've also realized that when their ears are fatigued, the next morning when they wake up, the first question in their head is, damn, what was I thinking on that mix?
Yeah, of course.
So part of like monitoring for me is like, how much can I work before fatigue and I lose perception? And the thing that I love so much about like Bear Dynamic, like just to be clear, I'm not sponsored by them at all. And if they wanted to sponsor me, I'd open arms, like, yes, Bear Dynamic, come to me. I will greet you the way Dave Chappelle reenacted Rick James, just like yes, love. But realistically, Bear Dynamic for me is just like, they're dark. And they don't actually have the most low end. It's almost like getting a pair of Genelecs, if for anybody that uses like just straight up monitors and never headphones, where they're not necessarily the best on the top or low end, but that doesn't mean they're bad. They're actually very, very accurate. What I love about them is that I can work for hours without like extreme fatigue or anything. Mixes translate much more consistently because the meat and potatoes in our mixes is in the mid-range, the low mids, the center mids, and the upper mids. The top end, let's be honest, a lot of times what's above 10K is like we're adding presence to a vocal, or we got some effects, some shimmering, some cymbals. But there's not a lot of sources that really have a lot of info past 10K. And there's not a lot of sources that have a lot of info below 100 hertz. Now, the argument could be made that, microphones pick up all the way down to 220 hertz, right?
Right,
and that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true. But it's usually not content that you're using on every source. Like if I'm recording a guitar, I'm not looking for 40 hertz in my guitar. It's nice. Like if you're playing alone at home, like we will tend to add a little more bass to the guitar. But when you have a bass player next to you, that bass starts getting clouded. And if you want more projection, you project in the mids. You don't project in the lows, because then your mids are now sucked in and you don't actually sound perceivably loud anymore. So the cool thing about the Bear Dynamics for me is that they actually offer this kind of like frequency range that actually encompasses the actual important part of the music, the mids. And because of this, it also is way less fatiguing, which means I can dive in and my ADHD can get me into my hyper focus mode where I'm just, completely derailed in this intense focus of this one track or something, and I could just be like, man, I really want to shape this out in a way that sounds clear. But because it's so good at showing you what's not good, it's like NS10s for both your ears. I've had better translation results in Bear Dynamics than I have ever had with like Audio-Technica, something that had nice low end and everything. But because of that, it was a very false sense of what kind of low end I had. For instance, like you see people wanting ATCs all the time. I used to work on a pair of ATC SEM 45As for a good 2 years before I sold them. And my favorite thing about them was they almost had no subs. So if it didn't translate on those speakers, it wouldn't translate in general on your lows, and I hate to say they were giant NS10s, they were very expensive NS10s, but Bear Dynamics offer you that sense of workflow at such a low price point with such a level of clarity that you're just kind of like, I don't think I've ever gone to a session without taking my Bear Dynamics anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's not because it's the one that I'm most used to, But anytime I get a pair of Audio-Technica ATH-M50Xs or things of that nature, I have not gotten those same results when listening back on a speaker. Now, obviously, every set of headphones is different. For instance, when you use headphones, if you don't use a feature that's known as crossfeed, meaning that a little bit of the left gets fed into the right or a little bit of the right gets fed into the left, if you don't use a feature of that nature, it'll never replicate what it feels like to work on speakers, because with speakers, our ears naturally hear things out of phase. But in headphones, it's impossible to do that because we're directly plugged in and the other ear doesn't hear what the other ear is hearing.
Right.
You know? So with that said, with Bear Dynamics, it's not that they fix this phase issue whatsoever, but at the very least, they have you focused in on the ranges that people have the most issues with when it comes to clarity, which is your mids.
Amazing.
You know, it'd be nice to have those lows, but it'd also be nice to know where in the lows I'm actually clouded versus feeling the low. You know, it'd be nice to know where in the top end it's harsh versus just hearing all the air.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
And you could always make up for that stuff with, you know, whether it's Sound ID or like I mentioned, I'm EQing the output of my RME interface, which is you know, it's more broadband than that, but you kind of get what you need, which is cool. But amazing. So are you mastering with headphones, or are you mastering with monitors?
So I master with monitors. I use a pair of Strauss NF3s. I love these monitors. They're amazing. And believe it or not,
that's the same as
5
DK,
inches.
right? That's the
same exact ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's funny because so the only reason I sold the ATCs, I'll be honest, the day I can, I'm going to go back to ATC. And it's not to say that Strauss isn't good enough. It's just that there was something magical about the ATCs that I really loved about the mid-range. Like, it was like the bully.
That. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the bully friend is what it is. Like, you ever had a friend that, like, and I tell people all the time, you want a friend that calls you on your shit.
Yes.
Yeah, the ATCs, even if you do good work, they're like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, there's still something going on right there, but like, yeah, no, it's cool. It's cool. You know, like, it's like, God damn it, let me have this one. But then you go to your car and you're like, oh my God, it sounds so good.
Yeah.
Like, you just have that moment of awe every time you go to your car, you pop on your AirPods, and I'm like, arguably, I'd say that I had better mixes on the ATCs because these Strausses are so amazing too.
Yeah.
They just have a different level of amazingness. Have you ever told somebody to listen for compression? Oh, do you hear how it squishes this thing like this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
ATC's transient information is so on point.
Yeah.
ATC, sorry, Strauss's.
That's what DK said
Strauss's
also.
transient. Yeah, Strauss's transient information is so good.
And Jesse Ray Ernster said that as well.
So here's the fun fact. I actually own Jesse's NF3s on accident. Not on purpose. Yeah,
really?
On accident. So he sold them to a friend of his when he was buying the midfield ones. And his friend moved to a new apartment that just had noise complaint issues going on, and then he put them on reverb, I think it was. And I messaged him like, hey, I'm actually selling my ATCs this weekend, and I was actually considering a pair of these. Is there a way to listen to them? He's like, unfortunately not. They're still in their box. I bought them from my friend Jesse Ray Ernstern. And I was like, I know Jesse. Wait, what? And then I hit up Jesse, and I'm like, hey, man, did you sell your NF3s? He's like, yeah, why? I was like, who did you sell them to? And he named the guy out. And I was like,
okay.
These are the speakers Doja and all these other like Burner Boy records were mixed on. I'm like, DK loves them. Jesse's always been boasting about them. And I've been seeing that Sony mastering switched over to Strauss and everything. I'm like, I got to give him a shot. Like, you know, I had just gotten this new office, which is the only reason I sold the ATCs. Like my mixing and recording room is down the hall to the left of where I am. But we were so busy at the time, I never got to work on the projects I needed to work on. So I decided to get my own office down the hall so I could just focus on my work, which is where I am now. Like all this black you see behind me is just acoustic treatment. It's literally just 8-foot by 6-foot panels and everything, clouds above me.
Yeah.
Like this room is so dead. People walk in and they're like, it's scary being in here. I'm like, really? They're like, you hear tinnitus immediately. I'm like, my bad. But the thing that was crazy is like in such a dead room, you could really hear what's going on with these Strausses. And it's, the ATCs felt like a wall of sound. like a two-dimensional plane, almost like somebody gave you a piece of paper and every frequency was laid out in front of you in detail. The Strauss feel very 3D. And they're only 5 inches and they get way lower than my 45s ever did. Like these things can reach 30 hertz, no problem. I was, like I said, the Sekou method mastering. I remember I was mastering for Sekou Bunch on ATCs, and he's like, it needs more bass. And I was like, no, it's got plenty, trust me. And I'd switch over to the PA system and he'd be like, yeah, I like that. Well, then when I got this office and he saw my 5-inch monitors, he's like, man, where's the sub? Like those little things aren't doing that. I'm like, no, these little 5-inch monitors, they have amazing detail transients in the lows, mids, top end, everything. Like whenever I'm doing mastering work on these things, I can hear every little change that I'm making, even into like the 1% knobs, you know, like when you 0 to 100. Okay, cool. You get to 1% and you're like, I've done enough. I've done enough. Like you hear it. With ATC, it didn't feel like transient info. It felt like spectral info.
Got it.
So
you got to have both. One day you'll have both.
One day I'll have both. Like my office isn't that big, but you know, the one thing I do take pride in is I focused everything around the sound of the monitors and the headphones.
Yeah.
And like I said, I use 770s and 990s myself. Big fan of Bayer Dynamic. But it's insane how well these monitors perform. So the day I do go back to ATCs, it's still going to be a very sweet and sour experience. Like the sweetness of going back to something that you know and you love, after getting it just so you could afford to like pay for like 2 sets of monitors, one to keep in the recording room and one to keep in your mastering room. But then I would be sad to see these Strausses go because they're just so good. Like I'm not sponsored by Strauss. Like I said, I bought these used. Somehow ended up with Jesse's pair.
Amazing.
But like for 5-inch monitors, I don't need a sub. I don't need a crazy room calibration system. I use Sound ID for them. And to be honest, like I know some people are like, oh, well, that's still an issue with your room. Let's be honest. I've worked with the acousticians up in Nashville, here in LA, and Las Vegas, everywhere. Every room has a node. Every room has some level of correction that's still needed. If that wasn't the case, the Trinov system wouldn't sell at all. These acousticians that are pitching the Trinov are still putting it in these well-designed rooms, knowing that there's still going to be some phase correlation issues and all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking to avoid a costly investment in monitoring, go with headphones. You know, like some DT 770s and 990s are my favorites. I'm using the IIIs right now. We got sponsored by them. I like them for their convenience, not so much their sound. Like I can walk to the bathroom, do my thing, and still be listening to the same mix in my headphones if I was using the IIIs. So forget about cable length and all that kind of stuff. But if you're willing to invest in something, the Strausses are amazing. They're expensive. They're about $7,800 without the amp. And for 5-inch monitors, I don't think I could have ever found something as amazing as this.
Sick.
Yeah, but I also wouldn't mind going back to Genelec.
Yeah.
Yeah, Genelecs are just amazing.
So you're happy with lots of different options, and they all seem to translate for you, I guess is the bottom line.
Yeah, they translate once you get to know them. You know what I mean? Like Adams I had for a while and always had a hard time translating with.
Yes.
Focals I had them for a long time, had a hard time translating.
Really?
I'm really curious to hear the A77X from Adam, which now features a Sound ID built in. So I'm curious to hear how that plays a role in their new components and everything. But the one thing that all 3 monitor brands that I like share is their focus in the mids.
Right, the mids.
They have this insane clarity in the mids, and then even on the headphones, Bayer Dynamics, it's all about the mids. Like if you're looking to get better at mixing or mastering, you have to learn where the meat and potatoes is, and that doesn't mean in what compressor, what plugin you have, but rather where is the detail that most people seem to have an issue with. That way you can communicate these issues.
Amazing. Yeah, I will add that Kevin McCluskey, who's done a lot of the mixes for like the Baby and a lot of the stuff coming out of like the the Charlotte, North Carolina scene, or generally speaking, he does all his mixes with the 770 Pros. So
Yeah.
he's like totally in headphones.
See, and I'm always impressed by that because like
I don't know.
it's a different animal.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, headphones, they tire me out. I don't have the same stamina with headphones as I do with speakers. So I don't think I could ever really mix with headphones. But you need them for the sessions,
Oh, absolutely.
And also referencing and podcasting, all the things.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's getting super late here, so let's head over to the sauce segment, and we could chat more things another time because there's so much to cover. So you sent me a track called "Bitch" by Jalen Rance. So let's have a listen to that for about 90 seconds, and we'll talk a little bit about it. Sound cool?
Sure.
Yeah, Lou, it sounds so good. I love how open it is. It just feels very wide open, like not compressed, not tiny, just like lush, open. You could see through it, 3D kind of thing. Yeah, vocals sound
great. That was on the ATCs.
Oh yeah, and I love the low. I love the low end. I love the bass.
Thank you.
Sub bass, whatever synth it is. I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds dope.
Thank you. Yeah, on that one, it was actually a really special record. I had mentioned this like before and stuff, but like the artist and I were working together on his album because his manager brought the artist to me. It's like, hey, we're trying to help get this album out. We don't have a budget. We don't really have much going on. Like, is there any way we can get you involved? And I'm like, let me hear the artist. After talking to the artist and meeting him, taking a listen to the album, I'm like, yes, I want to help him. Like, I think this is really dope. And sure enough, we got to a point in the album where we're almost done mixing everything. And they're like, I think we have like one more song to add. And I talked to him like, hey, I heard there's like one more song. He's like, well, I don't know. I don't know if I want to add it. I'm like, well, what's wrong? He's like, I'm not 100% confident that I like what I'm hearing. And I'm like, okay. And we take a listen to it together. I'm like, part of it is I think that it's just like leads and like you might have not just been feeling it that day, but I really like what you're doing. I really think that there's something there. And he's like, yeah, I just don't know what to do. I'm like, well, how would you feel about, us working together on it? Like, come to the studio, I'll cover the time and everything. And let's just kind of like dive in on it. And he was really open to that. So this wasn't just something that like I mixed or mastered, but this is something that I actually collaborated with him and vocal produced, from melodies to lyric choices here and there. Like, obviously he himself is the lyricist and he himself is the artist. I'll never take that away from him because he's such an amazing artist. I'll support him to the day we don't talk, even when we don't talk, I'll still be buying songs from him. I'll still support him because he's just that awesome of a person. But it's really cool because like this song just felt like such an important message of like, reassuring yourself of your worth in like a post breakup kind of sense that, I've been with my fiance 13 years now.
Oh, wow.
If I ever lost our relationship and what it meant to me, and it was over something negative, I would have a hard time feeling that self-worth for a little while, and that's something that I feel like everybody would struggle with. And, in the song, he talks about, you just weren't worth my time. I don't think that's necessarily true all the time, but the message itself is pretty clear. It's, you have to remember to value yourself. And so I asked him like, hey, is there a way we can kind of tap into that? Like, can we just kind of try to bring that out? And so from the chorus melodies and everything, I helped him write the stacks and everything, because though I'm not the best singer, I'll help vocal write for people once in a while. But the thing I love most is backing vocals and translation of emotion. It works in mixing, mastering, everything. Translation of emotion is such a big thing that when we got to work on this song, like my sole goal on this one was translating what the artist was going through and what they felt. That
was it your sole goal or your soul goal?
My both.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like I want people to feel something when they listen to music, because my favorite artist growing up was Anthony Hamilton, and everything about his music was just so, I guess, attractive in a emotional sense. Like it was magnetic. And it's because, like, I was in 6th grade when Coming From Where I'm From came out, and Charlene and all these records. But yet I was some 6th grader feeling like he knew something about the world because I could connect on an emotional level. Maybe I couldn't intellectually or maturely understand the concept, but it made you feel something hearing it.
Yeah.
And my goal when I work with an artist is for that, whether it be the mixing, the mastering, or something, I want to really display those emotions up front. And with this record, almost every mix decision was based around emotion.
Cool. That's crazy. Yeah, I love it. Well, the emotions definitely come across, and also those harmonies, they sound amazing, and you did a great job on it. You killed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you believed in the artist, and you showed up and you gave a little extra to make this happen was awesome. And we keep going back to this, I guess maybe we're circling back now to the beginning of like the go-giver mentality of just being there and having the back of the artist to make it get across the finish line in the best possible way. So, congrats. Yeah. Any last thoughts on this Saw segment before we?
If you're trying to get the best mix of your low end, like we did for this one, get a good source. It's the hardest thing for people to swallow. There's a lot of songs on this album where you'll actually hear the bass lines, and those were recorded on a Moog Subsequent 37, going into like an API 512, and then that into a Lynx Aurora interface. That sounds all fine and good, but I bet you anything, the same signal chain would sound like doo-doo if it was a bad performance from the instrumentalist. Part of what you're mixing is the actual performance, and that emotional tie that I have to records is also needed to be translated in the performance. So I feel like a lot of the credit for like why it sounds so good is also like the performance behind it and wanting to exemplify that performance, right? Jay the Love Child, produced by Jay, or Sounds Like Jay, I forget what his Instagram is. He helped out on the project and did like bass on one of the songs called Worth It. And like the previous bass was just so mechanical that when he came in and did the bass line with the Subsequent 37 on that one, it felt so much more captivating and emotional that it was amazing. On the Bitch song, the vocals only sound so good because like I really wanted him to feel it. So if you're ever taking on a project that you feel like you need to see it through, whether you're getting paid or not, it's okay to voice when something needs a new take.
Yeah.
If the vocals you were sent on a mix just feel very dry and bland, but they want you to make it sound like Beyonce sang it, understand that Beyonce is not just an artist, but she's an entertainer, and she knows how to entertain, which means she knows how to perform.
Right.
If you want that level of, results from a record, you got to find a way to captivate the audience, and it's okay to be the bad guy sometimes. Yeah. It's okay to be the one that's honest. You need that in your life for yourself, and you need that for your friends. Like if your friend is drinking soda every day, wondering why he's not losing weight, you kind of got to be the bad guy and say, well, this is why you're not getting certain results in your weight loss, If you're an artist and you seek out a mixing engineer because you believe that they can take you to the next level, you should also be willing to listen to them when they have critique. If you seek out a producer who you believe their productions can give you that edge, but your performance is not matching that standard, then you need to be able to hear it from them as well. You have to be open to critique. So a big part of the reason why this record sounds the way that it does, and the reason the mix was able to translate the way that it did, is because of open communication. So if you want a good mix, learn to communicate. That's the same thing for mastering engineers working with mixing engineers. Learn to communicate. Your relationship will only benefit from it.
Yeah, I love it. So communication, community, building trust, all those things, all the good things. Giving from yourself, supporting the artist. Yeah, man. Lots of lessons. This is great, man. I'm having a blast, and I'm learning so much. So yeah, thanks for coming on the air. I have to say, it's good you have a podcast because you're a great teacher. You have you're really well like spoken about things that you've thought through. So I think that's just like something I'm picking up on. So it was great to hear your detailed deep dive on the mastering chain. Like it was like, oh, this is so coherent, and like I understand what you're doing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Awesome. Well, as I'll bring this interview towards the close, because it's getting really late here in Israel, 10 hours ahead of you.
Oh shit.
Yeah, no shit. This is when I do it, man. Post bedtime.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask everybody about creative energies. We all have days where we're super pumped to get in, do our work, but there's days where we're less inspired. Do you either have any habits, routines, or techniques, or just things that you do if you want to flip your mood to kind of get jazzed and get back in the studio?
Yes, and I hate to admit, but they're sitting right in front of me. So I'm a big believer that we start because of love and we stay because of our want to stay in love with what we do for a living and not go back to something we hate. But it's very easy for us to fall out of love with something that we see every day. You know, it's call it the honeymoon stages of life, right? When you start making music, you're so inspired and creative juices are just flowing and everything. You got a new guitar and that new guitar just inspired you to make a new song, right?
Totally.
I'm a big believer in that. And I'm also a big believer in rewarding yourself for your, success. Here's the issue with that. If all your rewards surround your work, then you have nothing but work and you never have time for yourself. So the days that you don't feel like going in, you kind of have to remind yourself why you're going in and why you do this, For me, it took a little bit. I went through a burnout stage, and the burnout stage was not helpful. I want to say about a year ago. Like I'm not very forthcoming with my own needs personally. Like most people can't tell when I need something. Not even my own fiance, because like I said, in Latin culture, we're kind of taught to be machista, do it for yourself. You don't need anybody, whatever. Like it's a very toxic trait of the culture. But when you actually start doing more and more of this work, like I said, it's easy to fall out of love with it. And when I was burning out, there was a stage of me that was like, do I want to continue doing this? Because like I got into this because I love it 13 years ago, around the same time I got into my relationship. And I've worked so hard to do this that sometimes it gets a little tough. Sometimes you're dealing with like cancellations, inconsistency from different clients and things of that nature. And sometimes it's your own inconsistency. Like you're not waking up on time every time you're running late to meetings and you start catching yourself doing these slip ups. Burnout's real. It's a depressive state, but you have to find something that kind of gets that creative juices going. And for me, it was kind of re-tapping into my inner child and trying to revert back to zero. Honestly, it's Pokemon cards. I kid you not. Like, here's like a Gengar that I really love and everything. Like I have like Lugia, Giratina, Rayquaza, all like the super rare cards. There's like, I kid you not, like sitting in front of me is probably $2,000 worth of cards between like 10 cards.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there's like cards surrounding my desk and all that. But like sometimes like just seeing the stuff that you enjoy and kind of rewarding yourself every time you do something, like, oh, you know what? Every time I mix 10 songs, I go out and I buy myself a booster box. It's like $100, but let's say you're charging, I don't know, $200 a mix. Let's say on a very like baseline level, right? $200 a mix, 10 mixes later, that's $2,000. You can take 5% of your investments to treat yourself to do something. And if that's your reward that kind of motivates you, then great. If you want to start a YouTube channel on that gets you going into your office and creating content, and then you do that as your reward at the end of the day. Find something that motivates you to get back into the office.
Yeah.
Because it's not like I stopped loving making music. In fact, I still love it to this day, but doing something alongside it that reminds you of like, hey, not everything has to be a job.
Right.
Reminds you that you also don't have to take every job.
Right.
I think the biggest reason a lot of us burn out and kind of helps us keep in line is knowing when a job's just not in alignment with your goals. For instance, like I said, like I don't really do the late nights anymore. I've gotten to a point where I can finally start saying no to projects. Mm-hmm. Even if it was potentially like, let's say that, I guess you could say, if somebody offered me, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. sessions and it could potentially win a Grammy and I had to work for the next 2 months like that, I did it before. And I hate to admit it, I know tons of people who currently do it. And most of those sessions, 99% of the time, will not result in a Grammy. And yet I know sessions where I took a 4-hour session in the middle of the day and that got me my gold plaque. You know, not everything is so gung-ho on like take every gig you can unless you're after a certain goal. But if it doesn't align with your goals, a lot of times you'll find yourself burning out. And I think that's the big difference between like setting boundaries and making sure that you can stay creative. There's going to be days where we have a hard time, but if like buying a new pedal inspires you to do something cool, then make sure you work up to that pedal.
Yeah.
You know, like make sure you earn the pedal. Don't just go out and buy a new pedal board and then be like, suddenly I'm inspired. But like find something that you like, start researching it and work towards it so that when it's in your hands, you're like, hell yes, this is in my hands. I earned this shit. You know, like there's a specific Pokemon card I want. It's an Umbreon VMAX from this series called Evolving Skies, whatever. I don't care that it's a $500 card. I love the artwork. You know, there's people who collect, and the sad part is those people tend to fall out of the love of the hobby of collecting cards because they're going after price numbers versus they are about the cards they're passionate about. Same thing with music. You know, if I were to just open packs of Pokemon cards all day long, the chances of me pulling that card are 1 in 1,000. The odds of me winning a Grammy are likely to be the same, even if I took every 12-hour session overnight. You know? Is it that you love doing music and you want to continue loving doing music for the next 30, 40 years or however long you plan on doing it for? Or is it that you only want a Grammy and once you get the Grammy, boom, you're done?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If the goal was to have a Ferrari, I hate to admit it, I could do a lot more things that make me a lot more money, a lot faster with a lot less work, a lot less networking involved and everything.
Yeah.
I could have just been a doctor and I would have had my doctorate by now. I would have probably been at a really good office by now and I'd be making 6 figures on my first payroll. You know, I hate to admit it, music is not that. So you have to, if you want to be inspired to go into your office, take on projects you believe in the artists that you're working with, even if it's not the highest paycheck that you get.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe how far some projects can take it. Like I said, I got to be in-house engineer for Dreamville for months until the pandemic hit. That's the only reason it stopped. Literally February 2020, boom, all studios were closed.
Right.
But I got to record a song with Ari Lennox called Chocolate by Kiana Lede for the Kiki album. And I kid you not, I was just in such awe of being able to work with such an amazing artist. I didn't care that I was getting paid. And I didn't know Elite was her producer until I met him and he told me, he's like, oh yeah, I produced Shea Butter Baby and I did this, I did that. I was like, holy shit, really? And the whole time before I knew that, I was like, dude, she's so amazing. I'd love to continue working with her, not knowing that I'm talking to the producer because I'm not over here clout chasing. I'm so focused on what is inspiring me to be there that day.
Yeah, the music.
Yeah, so if you're looking to find ways to stop the burnout or to get out of that funk, if you have multiple projects on your table and you don't want to do some of them and it's not timeline really restrictive, forget the ones you don't want to do. Work on the one you want to do today. Get the juices going again. You know, just do something that inspires you. If you like opening Pokemon cards like I do, then say, you know what? After I finish this mix, I'm going to go buy me a booster pack. You know what? I'm going to go to the local card shop. This mix paid me $400. I'm going to take 10% of that and I'm going to buy myself a nice $40 card.
Nice.
You know, and then you add that to your collection. And over the years, you start realizing like, wow, I really built up a collection, but it's because you built a system that keeps you going, keeps you motivated. Even if the motivation isn't because you have to take every gig, like maybe you picked up a few gigs you don't want to do, find a system that helps you push.
Yeah. Cool, man.
Yeah.
That's definitely out of the box, but
yeah.
Sometimes we got to get out of our box. You know?
Yeah, I'm literally in the box.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Almost literally.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing. All right, awesome. And the last question of the show, I ask everybody who comes on the show. Looking back on your journey, was there something that you either did or didn't do that you want to impart on your earlier self, or somebody who's kind of just coming up right now of like, yo, Lou, keep at that. It's going to get you where you want to go. Or Lou, don't do that. It's holding you back. What'd be that one piece of advice?
Don't drop your relationship if it means that much to you for your career. I think I say it all the time, and it sounds sad, but it's not. It's inspiring to me because my fiance almost let me take the choice of walking away twice for my career. She saw how hard I was pushing, and she felt like she was the distraction, that I was never home and things of that nature. But each time that she offered it to me, it was no question in my head, no, I don't want to choose my career. You have to have a sense of priority in your life. And I hate to admit it, but I'm always really glad that I chose my relationship over my career. I'm sure I could have had more platinum plaques. I'm sure I could have had a Grammy. I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure. But you know what? Shit gets tough sometimes, and you need somebody on your side. Yes, you can go rely on your family and go talk to your brother, your sister, your mom, dad, whatever, but not everybody has that support system readily available in their neighborhood. Like, my family lives here in LA. I'm sure if I called my sister on a tough day, she'd talk to me. But there's something very different to say when you have somebody that you're in a relationship with that's on your side, that wants to see you succeed when times get tough. You can go home, talk to them. I hear people say it all the time, fuck the relationship, people aren't loyal, this and that. You know what? You're fucking stupid. You're probably fucking around with the wrong people. People say that you attract the energy you put out. You know what? If you put out distrust everywhere, I promise you, you will attract distrust. But if you're here to support people and people recognize that, there are those who will take. I understand. And it sucks. It's frustrating and it's demotivating. Trust me, I've been there. But there are those who see that value and reciprocate it, and who want to help mold your life because of how much value you've given theirs. And your partner in life, I don't care what it is or who it is, literally, you wouldn't believe how much of a difference it makes in your career to have somebody on your side.
Yeah.
Whether that literally, it's extremely important. So if you're the type of person that says, you know what, I'm going to choose my relationship over my career and people are making fun of you, you know what? Fuck everybody else. Because let's be honest, the ones telling you that you should choose your career over your relationship, they're not going to be there. 9 times out of 10, you might find the 1 in 100 that will be there for you as a friend when times get tough, when your bills aren't getting paid because you can't find enough work, when you're kind of contemplating your career choices and all that. Like, none of your friends are going to your house to hug you and cry with you if you ever need to. When things get tough, when you have a loss in the family, none of your friends in the music industry are the ones doing that for you. And you might, like I said, you might find that 1 in 100. And if you do, you're lucky. But if you've got somebody at home that's really supporting you and rooting for you, and things are tough just because they need a little more attention, give them that attention. Give them that attention. You don't understand how special something like that at home is. And it's so beneficial to your career that there's no way to really quantify it, because I would actually, if I'm having a bad day at work, I call my fiance. If I'm having a good day at work, I call my fiance. If something amazing just happened and I want to celebrate, I call my fiance. It's always the same person. And the amazing thing is that we can cheer together and we can sob together, whatever it is. But if I lost that, I really don't know if I could actually react to life in the same way, because it's not that you're dependent on that person, but rather you have a sense of support, and not everybody has a sense of support. And a lot of us in our industry don't have that right away. We're still building our teams. We're still putting our foot in the door. We're the intern that nobody is paying attention to. And I hear you. This is why I offer free lessons to my interns. This is why I'm always willing to hear people's situation out. I'm always willing to find a solution that benefits everybody, because everybody's story is different. But if you have somebody that supports you, you don't understand the value of support until it's too late. And that's the one thing I would want to impart. Too many people are focused on their career and not enough on their quality of life. And the first step into actually getting a better life in general is finding those that support you, no matter what it be. You want to be an artist that paints? Fine. Find yourself somebody who actually is willing to understand you, not just understand your wallet or whatever. If you have issues of distrust, I'm just saying, go talk to somebody. A lot of people have issues of distrust and everything. I'll be honest, I've been cheated on before. My sister's been cheated on. I've seen it from other people and all that kind of stuff. I get it. It's tough. Life's not easy all the time. But if you can identify that there's somebody in your life that's rooting for you and you're pushing them away passively and they've kind of communicated that, like, hey, like, I haven't seen you. Go out, go talk to your best friend, go touch some grass, go have a beer, go have some chicken wings with the homies from high school and everything. Like, reconnect, because it's so easy to stay in your box and stress over work, and everything in life becomes about your work, that we look back at an older age and we're like, I wish I had more time to enjoy myself. So
right, we talked about that.
If you got a relationship, if you got a relationship, forget social media. The toxic king can go suck a nut. Realistically speaking, if relationships aren't for you, then obviously relationships aren't for you. But if you got somebody in your side of the court, doesn't mean you got to wife them. But, nurture that support, because, you may not have it tomorrow. Yeah.
I'm trying to think about how to best respond to that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's about like the long game. You know what I mean? Like we kind of talked about earlier, of like, if you want everything now, and you're willing to hustle and, do the Gary V thing, and, I don't know, like, that's one way to do it, but you might not be as happy, and you're more likely to burn out much faster, and you might get your goal, but then you might still be miserable because you've just accomplished this goal, and now you see, like, what did I actually do, And if you play the long game,
what good is it to have a nice house with nobody in it?
Exactly. And if you're playing the long game and you're trying to enjoy life and build meaningful relationships and maintain meaningful relationships, that's, you might get where you want to go a little slower, but at least it'll be worthwhile and it'll be an enjoyable journey,
Absolutely.
Yeah. I resonate with that a lot. And, as a father and a husband, like, I'm just trying to, like, make this sustainable for me. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That's kind of like the biggest goal, really, is like, how can I do this, do work that fulfills me creatively, but still sustains my family? Because, like, at the end of the day, if I have to choose one, I'm in the same boat as you. So
I'm choosing my family.
Absolutely, dude. Like, it's not a question. Yeah. So yeah, dude. Thanks for sharing that. That's a deep one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Lou, I'm getting, like, I need to go to sleep. So unfortunately, I do need to end this conversation, because I feel like we could go on about a bunch of more stuff, and this has been great. So before we wrap it, I just want to say thanks again. Appreciate you. Appreciate all that you're doing. Everyone should go check out the Mixing Music podcast and the work that Lou has done. And we'll be in touch. I'll have you back on again. Sure. We'll keep diving into topics.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man.